Live from, there it is. It is Friday, February 21st, here in the House Transportation Committee. And we have some committee discussion on the agenda for the next, 20 minutes or so, if it takes that long. We have Damian Leonard, our ledge counsel, in. We have a deadline of February 26th to respond to House appropriations. They sent a letter saying for each committee, chair to respond and define their priorities in the budget, their number 1, 2 priority, in a response. So, Damian will be the one to draft it for us. And I guess we have some ideas of what that might be, but right now is if you have a particular, priority or piece that you would like to be considered, for the letter, I would be willing to hear about it right now, we would, and I'm also can throw out what we've discussed, at least when I say we, I mean, I guess our vice chair and myself have discussed. There was also on testimony the other day, you did offer your 1 and 1A, because we have talked about it at least a little bit. I had indicated that the JTOC transfer of keeping that money in transportation was our number 1 priority in order to continue to fund transportation activity and infrastructure. That was our number 1 priority. Make sure that appropriations left that as is in the governor's recommend. And I believe the vice chair suggested that if there was a 1A, that it was, I don't want to say the wrong, that pointing to our financial picture going forward in our revenue scenario in terms of federal match monies and projects was sort of 1A is that we have a long-term structural problem with the transportation fund, but I'll let you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is a chart we're gonna get next week, but it was submitted to the Senate Transportation Committee, and it gives a picture in our outlook for as far as 2027, 2028, so on. But we're looking at a gap of $45 million for 2027. Or no, 30 million for 2027. 2028 is 45 million, and then the out years 38 and 29. So I mean, those are big numbers that we need to find a way to close that gap. And that's with the, I should say, and that's with the JTOC transfer. So if we lose that, the picture is going to get even
Oh,
worse.
so it's not 30,
It is for, it's 30 for 2027, 30, just about 30 and a half million dollars that we're gonna need for state funding. And if we don't have it, we're gonna leave federal dollars on the floor. So so I mean, I like I said, I think the 1A is sort of laying out this picture. What's, the corporations has seen this, but just laying out the deficit and the need for transportation budget to be whole, and to be whole, I mean, clawing back the money that's generated within our system, and that includes the purchase and use tax. And we should just reference when the education committee and the Ways and Means Committee do their work around education, and at the end of the day, there's going to be savings there, and we have to piggyback off that and make sure we can claw back over X amount of years to draw back down that 50 million back to the T fund. So that would be my what I.
And I guess I'll expand on that a little bit. Of the agenda for next week will be coming out shortly and whatnot. And on that is agency transportation, most likely their CFO. Also Logan from JFO, Logan will be in with the JFO. There are about 3 or 4, at least 3 or 4 presentations geared towards more information on the financial picture. We've talked about it. We've asked them to expand upon it. We've also asked them to show what's happened with the purchase and use tax and what the money has been, and the more the contributions to the education fund and how it's grown over the years and how it's limited us in transportation. We're going to continue to highlight that. A big chunk of next week, in addition to public transit, but a big chunk of next week will be about amplifying this financial picture. We've seen it in committee, and we've taken testimony on a whole number of revenue potential options, but we haven't had the presentations on the transportation money we send out. We talked about other ways to bring it in, but we do also send it out so that you will get at least 3 or 4 kind of presentations around this money that is going out, so.
What is how much do we give to the ed fund out of the purchasing expense?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It translates to.
Oh, like 50 million, I think. Yeah, it's for 50 million. Yeah.
Just over 40, shy of 50 this year.
Yeah,
It went over 40 last year, the year before, it was close to 50.
yeah.
But, and the one thing I do want to say is I have also heard that the sales and use tax, if there's a slowdown in the economy, the first thing people do is stop going out to eat and stop buying, puts the purchase of a new car off by a year. So that even that number that is growing,
Yeah.
it is subject to a very volatile drop if there is an economic downturn, and the amount of infrastructure that still happens, which we need to convey to appropriations. As we hear regularly from the agency, the infrastructure degrades every day. And even if that fund goes down on a downslope of economic activity, our liability in terms of our issues with the infrastructure doesn't change. It still needs to be worked on every day. But yes, it's up to over 40, and that will be part of the presentation. You're going to say enhanced, more detailed next week on top of what we've seen.
Great.
Representative, I just want to say, Representative Burke, did you have your hand up earlier? I'm not sure. I don't want to skip you if your hand was up. I don't want to skip you.
Sort of.
So I'm sorry. If not, we can come back to you. You can go to
No,
Representative Boucher and
I
come
know
back
what
to
I was gonna ask, but, I'm trying to get, and maybe, but I don't think it's a request for appropriations. I'm trying to find out if we can find $15,000 in the T-bill for this program that I talked to you about for introducing new American restaurant owners to buy cars. And it's the Economic Development Organization in this region is holding these, and they were doing it with Capstone and it's been very successful, and they just want to do 2 more, and they need $15,000. So I don't think that's something we ask appropriations or do we
For
just take
by
it
who?
for it's a workshop for new American
Oh, for
restaurant owners
Oh,
to teach them how to buy cars, because they don't know how to do that. They don't know what to look for. They don't know. And apparently the workshops have been extremely successful. The Melissa Bounty of the Economic Development Organization here, very well respected person, the head of that, has talked to me about it, and they're looking for $15,000. So I don't know where that's going to come from, but I think that maybe it could come
Well,
out of
I
it.
know they had the open
$15,000.
forum for members as far as appropriation requests for appropriation for open forum directly. I wouldn't be inclined to put it in our transportation letter to appropriation.
That's what I was going to say. Yes.
You're going to continue to work with members on the committee that think it's important that it be included in the transportation
Yes.
budget in some way, then you can
Exactly.
continue to work on
I just
that.
wanted to
Or you could
clarify.
work on that in the open spot, but I am, and I'm not suggesting that it's not a valuable spot. For this particular letter, what I really want to go in the direction, if there are big appropriations dealing with not.
That's exactly what I just wanted to
Yeah, right.
clarify what you wanted to do.
Right, and I'm
Okay.
talking about, right now, what we're definitely trying to get to is to make sure that Damien, or everybody understands what we're going to tell Damien to do in regards to the letter to appropriation. This is the direction that we think that the committee to go. There are specific other potential, programs that we might or might not work into the budget and into our T-bill, but
yeah, we can
This
shuffle
is-
the chairs on our deck. We can do that all day long, but if we can't control certain things, then that's what the letter.
Yeah.
It's for. It's beyond our control. So-
what are the transportation
Yeah.
priorities on appropriations? And appropriations is dealing with the entire scope of the entire budget. And my perspective is all I want them to think about when they think of transportation is the financial struggle that we are against in all of the other programs. I think is for us to deal with inside of our money and our piece. But what we need from them and we need from the whole body is this recognition of the structural problem we have in transportation funding. That's
We
what
want
I
our
think.
money back. That's
We want our money back, or you got to give us some new money.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Representative.
Yeah, all right, I agree, the J talk, I think, it feels like that we could possibly get. The sales and use, that's gonna be an uphill battle with all the problems with education and, that's the thing. I would like to get the 3.7 million to keep the MBUF process going, because right now it's on hold. And it's gonna remain on hold unless we get the federal money, and I kind of doubt we're gonna get that federal money. They released some, but anything like this, I'm not sure. And we can make a strong argument that within a year, we will be able to put that money back. And that is, while it's not gonna solve our transportation budget, it it will keep moving and I like, Representative Peasley idea of taking the
Teaser.
teaser, sorry. Teaser.
Sorry.
You changed your
I forgive you. When did you change your name?
Of actually adding the federal piece to it. So, I think that it might be another way, and we know we're gonna go in that direction anyways, we have to, and now we're just being delayed. And so the sooner we do it, the quicker we'll be able to capture those, revenues that we're not now. And it's a fair capture, nobody can argue against it. And that once that MDOT starts going, that might open up other opportunities too, for, all cars to start looking at capturing, it's a usage tax. The more you drive, the more you pay. So it seems fair, but I would hate to come back here next year and get the MBUF thing saying they did nothing. When we could have it in hand in a year or just a little bit more than a year. And I think the governor's behind it, so, I think all the way around, we should all agree that it's time to do that.
You're talking strictly electric, right?
Yeah, that's what it is, right?
I do need to be fair that you could use the process down the line. You could, a
Possibly.
user fee could be directed to anything, but right now our goal in the language does say specifically electric vehicles, but it is something that could be used. The system is designed to potentially do other things, but yes, this particular piece is electric.
Potential, yeah.
Representative.
Yeah, I would just second that. I think that makes a lot of sense. If we're thinking a little bit long-term. If we look at next year, if we don't have that MBUF set up, we're gonna be looking at a bigger deficit. And recognizing that money and I can't remember what the projections were for MBUF, like how much that's going to generate, but we should be able to see a return on that 3.7 million
Yeah, well,
within a year or
a
two.
rough guess was around 5 for the first year, and that should increment up every year.
5 million the first
Yeah,
year.
and that's just a rough estimate.
And if we get the federal money,
That
Then we
money
reimburse
could be clawed back.
yeah,
Yeah, we just gotta figure out what we need to ask for, it was 3.7. And I'm not sure if that's 700,000 state money match. Or if that's still in the budget, or do we expend that, I guess we need to
It
figure
might
that
still be
out.
in the budget, yeah.
Yeah, we just
We'll
need to
have to
figure
talk to
that out,
Patrick.
yeah.
And I would hear that when I hear what you're saying. That is something that we can handle inside the T-bill during our next 2 weeks of potentially, as opposed to, doesn't necessarily have to be in the appropriations.
Boy, three
I think
three plus million.
If we're gonna do it, I think it would have to be from the general fund, yeah, we're not gonna find 3.7 million, or 3 million. Yeah, I mean, theoretically, we could. But if we're gonna go down that road, I think the ask would be,
I see what you're saying. So you're
Outside,
asking
yeah.
for 3 million,
yes,
making the argument that you're going to
Yeah.
return 6 million
yeah,
in the first year. I guess the first thing we need is confirmation from Logan that that's,
Yeah.
these are the numbers.
I had asked them to do that.
If that's the direction
yeah.
we're gonna go. And the AOT would have to both make sure that our numbers are
Right.
what they really need. I certainly agree with the concept that the 18-month delay from today, whether it was an additional
With the
12
grant.
months, yeah, whether that was testimony that didn't go over well. For some cases,
Is this, are we gonna try to, I don't know if it's appropriate enough, are we gonna try to pave more roads? Is it?
well, I guess that's part of what we're talking about in terms of how much money do we have to do work, in terms of what we will or won't be able to do. Or do we have enough money to do?
This should be one of our main focuses. And sometimes I think we take money and put it in places where it could be better used towards tiring the roads.
Well, I think the MBUF would go to exactly your concern.
Is that enough,
it would
though?
generate, no, it's not enough, but it's a start. I mean, you need more revenue to pave, you know, and that's probably one thing we should put right in our letter is that, you know, justification of lowering purchase and use and keeping the 20 million is the miles.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, 200, 300 down to 120, you know, just to point that out.
We're still, I mean, even with that, we're still.
Oh, yeah, we're still behind. Yeah, exactly.
You know, and the other thing is that the town's funding has been flat, just flat for a while. It doesn't represent a bit of what the transportation department wants from us. For some reason, it seems like they just don't wanna help out the towns anymore each year, and I know the dollar's gone down. The dollar's not worth beans. All the stuff you could have bought years ago, you certainly couldn't buy that much now. I'm just amazed at how it just stays flatline. How do we come up with that? Nothing more for the towns, but
Well,
and we don't even have enough to pave our
I would count
roads.
that as a support of my effort to put in the T-bill that I believe, Damien, you're gonna be presenting on next week. Is the language that I'm looking to add, we are looking to add, I guess, would say that, sounds like you would support. We're looking to add that those programs be tied to some level of any increase in transportation funds. Would then thus have to be shared with their portion to the towns or to the inflation. We'll have to decide that, but that's coming in next week as well. That's part of the T-bill language, but that will.
I didn't know if it was appropriate this, I
No, that's.
didn't know if it was.
That's one of the
appropriate time or not.
parts that I talk about when you open up committee discussion. It can go in lots of different directions. What we are, what it does, we increase that revenue to the town, to the money to the towns. It is money that's either only tied as if the transportation and full revenue goes up, so that then theirs can go up. Or if it's just tied to inflation, you're taking that, putting more money there. That is money that's not going into the transportation fund for the state projects. So we have to be aware that if we do take some of that and put it in the towns, we are putting the agency, and particularly the state part programs would potentially, they would argue, would have less money. But that's part of what we're looking at next. We are looking at that next week, and that's inside the T-bill.
There's some big wages in that book.
So that's the whole difference. Representative Doyle?
One of the town highways, of these is actually, does tie itself to, the inflationary.
Yeah, we did
And
that.
Kind of, yeah.
We're looking to
So,
touch the other two.
Formula funding, the other ones are grants. And we got testimony that said maybe every 7 years you might get a grant.
So appropriations letter. MBUF would like to be considered, right?
So
And,
on the MBUF, you're asking for the 3.7 million. Are you asking for that in general fund dollars?
Well, we gotta get the number. It's 3 million and then we
Okay.
set aside 350 over the multiple years. I just don't know if that money
Yeah.
got spent.
Okay.
It's all that amount.
Okay,
Yeah.
Out of the general fund, yes.
Yeah.
And-
Right.
we
and
also
if they
need
get-
confirmation that the agency can, I'm sorry. I interrupted.
Right, no,
I'm
you're
sorry.
right. We also need confirmation whether that's the exact number that they need, what they actually need, right?
And will they be able to accomplish? it?
Right.
So-
I thought he said yes, but we should get confirmation.
so what I can start doing, I know my time is getting short. What I'll start doing is before we meet next week, I'm gonna put together a rough draft. And I will begin the letter with a general explanation of how funding for transportation is not keeping up with costs. We're paving less. Towns are being asked to do the same amount with what is effectively less dollars, et cetera. The JTOC transfer will be the next piece in there, because, you know, if the money is not going as far, the committee is asking that the JTOC transfer not be taken away from the T fund. And then the next piece will be, I'll put in a placeholder for the MBUF with some general explanation about how this is a way to capture what is essentially lost revenue around electric vehicles as they are increasingly used in the state. rather than just the sort of placeholder that is in place right now with the extra fees at registration. And how that would pay back, and then we can fill in specifics. Are there other things for now, or should I start with that and then we can get back to it next week? I know there are other small funding questions, and we'll be talking about changing formulas and so forth in T-fund language next week.
Representative Burke?
Something that just came up, and I don't know if we have time to discuss it. We all got a letter from environmental organizations around money for asking for, big money, money for, like, to fully fund the electric vehicle incentives that have been very, very successful in helping people get into lower cost transportation options. So I don't know if you read the letter, if we have time to talk about it next week for discussion. I think it might be a big discussion.
Okay, well, I'm not prepared to talk about it right now. I know you're right.
Because I don't know what our
We can put
timing
that
is.
on, sort of, I'll put it on my notes and follow up and talk about, but
I mean, when does the
I-
letter have to go?
the letter has to be delivered on the 26th.
Which is.
Yeah, that's next Wednesday. So,
And we're scheduled to come back to talk more about this, or to finalize it on Wednesday, so we'll have to move quick on that
Right,
portion of it.
well, just to have the discussion about it.
Yeah, and we're into our next, time that has jumped in, but if you wanted 30 seconds, Representative Lally and then Representative White, you get 30 more seconds, and moving on to you're good, okay?
Do we want to ask Damien to also reference the gas tax going down, which just adds to our argument that transportation funding is going down? And then secondly, are we going to ask for the money that's going to the Ed Fund to stay here?
Yeah, that was part of my
Yeah.
1A.
Okay.
Yeah,
I just didn't hear Damien say that.
And the justification would be the analysis gap for
okay,
those numbers. Well, I mean, we could call it whatever.
We're saying the J-Talks are number one priority and
This is important as what? 1A.
He's saying our biggest issue is making sure that we do protect
Yeah.
that
Oh,
20.
100%,
And our
yeah.
second
Yeah.
biggest issue is trying to point out that we have
Yeah.
that only takes
Oh,
care of this
okay.
year. We have a big gap.
I got it.
And we have a huge gap that we're headed towards with support. And number three is that one of the ways we think we can plug at least a little bit of that gap is potentially MBUS.
To be at a.
The MBUP is the next piece on there that we are saying that if we do that, then we will be producing revenue to help close that gap.
Yeah, I'm not a physical cliff, a bridge is missing.
Okay, so we'll wrap up that portion and we certainly going to be coming back to it. It'll generate more conversations. And then this is Friday, and Friday we often hear from, and members of the committee have asked to hear from these next couple of guests. So we have them on the agenda. And Connie Beal, I very much, Damien, thank you very much. And
Thank
we'll be seeing you again.
Yes, buddy.
I'll be back in later this morning, just to listen in on testimony, so.
Okay,
See you then.
all right, thank you very much. And now we're going to go to the United Way and welcome Connie Beal. The next couple ones are Zoom presentations and our requests from committee members. So please, welcome and take it over.
Hi. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to step in, and I'm not going to take a lot of your time, but I want to share some perspectives from United Way's Working Bridges program. Many of you know about what we do, probably.
Officially identify yourself, please.
Oh, yes. My name is Connie Beal. I'm United Way's Working Bridges Director. I live in St. Albans, Vermont. Got a couple kids. We've been sledding down Congress Street. That's me. So thanks for having me and inviting me. I'm just going to go real quick so I can share just who we are, what Working Bridges is. Working Bridges is an innovative program, and we partner with local employers to support employee retention, advancement, employee productivity, safety, really supporting individuals with their financial stability and economic opportunity. And we do that a few different ways. And we do that because we recognize that employment is really, it is a vehicle for opportunity, and that life issues can overwhelm a worker's ability to be at a job. Any worker can can lose a good job because of life issues or because of scarcity of resources. But we also see that workplaces are a platform to capture employees and connect with people with those essential resources so they can show up at work and support individual financial stability in Vermont. We do this through a fee-for-service model that is also supported by community giving and philanthropy. It's a triple return on investment because it's good for businesses and our economy, it's good for those individual employees that we work with, and it's great for community to be involved in our own local economic development and workforce development. We have several strategies to do what we do, but the thing I'll talk to you the most about is through our work called resource coordination, which is our keystone strategy that helps employees one-on-one to navigate these essential workforce infrastructure resources that includes transportation. And I'm going to talk about transportation from the perspective of the asset limited income constrained worker. That's the person that has to be, is in an essential job, and they have to show up to their job in order to do the work. They do not have the capability to pivot to a remote setting as we are here today. And their work is really the backbone of our state. They're the ones who are keeping the hospitals clean, the lights on. They're the folks who are providing patient care hands-on. They are caregivers. They are essential to our well-being and keeping the doors open for business. We also provide training and education on site with supervisors, managers, as well as employees at large. And we also provide a fair amount of data and reflection and opportunity for innovation with our business partners. Often our employers, our business partners that we work with come to us and we can reflect with them on the unmet needs that many of the shared workforce expresses, and that we can share what our employees needing right now to show up fully at their jobs. The way forward to do this is Working Bridges has built trusted relationships over 19 years. And now we're in northern Vermont, covering not where we started was northwest Vermont in Chittenden County. And we are beyond that now. We serve both rural and more densely populated areas. And as you know, employees work and live and play all over Vermont. And so our program really works with employees who live very rurally. Our program also works with employees who live in more densely populated areas. These are
We have a
Oh, yeah.
question from the committee, if you
Go
don't
ahead.
mind.
I would love questions. Yeah.
Representative McCoy?
Yes, so the previous slide, you had something about you have financial coaches, and so we were just discussing how does somebody purchase a vehicle who might loan it? Do you provide that service?
Yes. So I'll get to a slide where we can talk a little more about what are the things that the employees we work with are asking for and how do we handle those interactions. And financial coaching is an integrated tool that resource coordinators provide. We talk about our work as an integrated financial stability model or financial wellness at work, because rooted in our work one-on-one is helping people with long-term financial goals. Sometimes that's buying their first car or trying to fix a car that's not working. But we have to address the immediacy of the crisis, right? Often we'll work with employees who are in deep scarcity and they need support to keep something running, to keep that car inspected, to get that last bit of gas so that they can actually get to that next paycheck. So, and if we take someone out of the workforce, it snowballs and gets worse. And so there are people who could join the workforce if we can support them with their personal vehicle or financial coaching, and to support them in their best transportation resource. And so that's really what we're designed to do.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So manufacturing and healthcare, home health is also where you'll see us. You'll see us wherever people have to be in person to do the job. And I do feel I feel good about sharing that we have support coming in Lamoille, where I see our United Way of Lamoille County is coming along. And it's just really nice to see us moving further and further. These are the employers that we currently partner with over, I believe it's 30, did I say 30? Over 30. And the thing about this network of employers is that many of these employers are paying well benefiting well, doing really creative and good things for their workforce, it doesn't mean that employees in these companies don't come and experience scarcity. Unexpected things happen. And one of the things I've seen over the 10 years that I've been doing the work is that a vehicle or transportation solution that goes away right away is one of the most immediate things that takes someone out of the workforce. Employees can be homeless and without housing and still show up to a job if they have the car, right? Or if they have that ride. And there are things that work, and I want to make sure I share that with you. But from the employer perspective, I do want to share that at the employers we partner with identify transportation as a significant recruitment and retention problem or an issue. It's a challenge for them to grow their workforce and keep their people. Van pooling works really awesome when it works. And so employers we work with, some do have van pools, most of them do not. And there are some reasons as to why those things may not come together. We've worked with them to provide opportunities to engage in van pooling, but it's really hard to ensure ridership amongst an employee base or a workforce where there's instability, right? When there's financial instability, workplaces experience that, they feel that. And I think there's it's often really hard to look beyond the day and to look beyond look beyond the day and know what tomorrow will bring. There can be a lack of reliable drivers, maybe shift disruptions, because we're talking about 24/7 workplaces that need multiple shifts to have that transportation. And so carpooling and vanpooling sometimes can't provide for that. So these are some of the reasons I think that you can look at as to why vanpooling may or may not be a fit, right? It's definitely not a one size fits all. And we also, I have to bring up housing because housing certainly impacts where employees are living. They're moving out of those densely populated areas because affordable housing is further out and trading off costs of housing for their transportation, which is just increasing the reliance on personal vehicles, right? This idea of the further out you are, the less apt you're able to get to that transportation hub. And I also see a trend from this last year is that Vermont's workforce shortage is creating some really deep impacts for employees who have multiple roles outside of their primary job. They may have another job now. They may actually be working longer hours. They're working overtime. They're also in the role of caregiver as parent or maybe taking care of aging parents. So there is added strain right now, I think, for those who are in essential positions. I want to share this with you in 2024 from the employee perspective, those that we meet with. So no one is required to meet with us for financial coaching or resource coordination. We go to the workplace, we're on site, we're confidential, and employees come to us when things come up. In 2024, we served over 1,600 employees. Those are individual employees across those workplaces, and only 127 employees reached out for transportation assistance. We know our resource coordinators in those interactions with employees provided referrals to things like carpooling, and I'll show a screen about where we referred employees and what resources did they rely on. But I also wanted to just show that well, on this next slide, you'll see this kind of comes back to your question about how do you help people with transportation? Because sometimes there just aren't resources like where you live if you're really out there. And so these are some of the questions those resource coordinators they field. So things like my car died, my auto loan is over $600 a month. I can't financially deal with that. My license is suspended. Can you help me get my license back? Do you know about the bus routes? If they are in a more densely populated area and there is a route, we're going to help coach them along. We want them to know their transportation options first and foremost. So that's part of embedded in our model is a deep assessment about the resources both internally and externally that employee has available to them. And sometimes it's flexible funds that an employee says, I just need a little bit more to get by. I just started this job. I haven't had a paycheck yet. I just need a little more to help me get to that next level. And can you help me with carpooling? So we lean on Go Vermont's carpooling matching. It's a really great way for us to provide those kinds of options when they work. Here's a list of the actual referrals made. So these are the resources in the community across Vermont and local and regionally that we either referred to or helped employees navigate so that they could get what they need as it relates to transportation. Things like the Mileage Smart Incentive Program, which provided an incentive for e-vehicles, car sharing options where available, help navigating auto insurance, licenses, driving tests. Sometimes it's about troubleshooting car repair, right? We've even worked with Old Spokes Home to help people who are commuting by bike to access affordable bicycles. One of the things that's challenging around bicycles, commuting for bike, the seasonal piece, and we're working with people who are on their feet all day, and often it's very hard for them to incorporate using bicycles in their commuting. A couple more things. This slide, I think, is really where I wanted to make sure I drive home the ideas of it all and what we've been able to try. So we know there are resources out there. They don't always work for someone who's in deep scarcity, but we do see workplaces as a platform for transportation services. It's a great way to connect with people, to find out what zip codes they're in, and to leverage that information. However, when van pooling doesn't work, or if the company's too small, we've tried to design some pilots that bring employers together and to leverage networks of networks. So some employers are prepared to do that. Going back to 2019, which is a bit of a weird time because it's before a lot of things happened, but it is important to share that we did do a pilot in 2019 where we provide on-demand van rides for commutes with employees who had a sudden unexpected loss in their transportation resource. We didn't know what to expect. It was only 6 months. We used a grant to cover the costs. There were 67 employees who received rides. And it was either by Ready to Go's van, or we used cabs at that time as backup for the multiple shifts. The cabs were expensive. The van was less expensive. But all said and done, in 6 months, those 3 employers in those rides cost $1,938. It wasn't a lot of money, but we had to do more work of actually being in the workplace to provide that benefit. And I think leveraging the workplace and the relationships within the workplace is a really key strategy in what we try or how we get to people, and thinking about where do people have to go. The second piece is our team has identified short-term flexible funds for employees with no transportation resources. And I say short-term because it's not forever, but it's meant to help that person who is in the most scarce place and doesn't have those circles of backup for their transportation. So an example, one of our employer partners has designed something called a healthy car fund. Not every employer has access to philanthropy in that way. However, for these folks, they've been able to design a loan grant program to help employees with car repairs, snow tires, and even pre-purchase inspections to make sure that those employees who are using tax refunds to buy bad cars were in a better position in their purchase of vehicles and keeping those cars safe. And that was really the catalyst for that, was seeing that some of the employees come tax time were buying these cars that just couldn't stay on the road. And it created, again, that snowball effect and takes people out of the workforce. We've also, in these last 2 to 3 years, we've launched the 185 Bridge Fund, which is an internal benefit to employees of our network, where we can help people with those small dollars. And in 2024, we helped, let's see, how many do we, 7, only 7 employees. So of those 127 employees that needed transportation assistance, which could have been transportation counseling, carpools, all of those resources we know about, there were some employees who couldn't connect to those existing resources, that wasn't going to be the option. The best option was going to be to help them with car repair, to help them with gas, and even one of them was to help them with bus passes. So sometimes what we need is that very small dollar to be able to apply that once we've assessed the whole picture. And then that gives us a chance to give someone a little more bandwidth to address those deeper issues. Lastly, I want to leave you with the ask that we continue to engage those employer networks, because I do think that we need to continue to provide education about the existing options, but I do want to suggest that the more we can provide local, customizable, scalable, shared, on-demand, short-term strategies for those that have deep scarcity around transportation, I think we could actually see some meaningful results for what is a very vulnerable, smaller population. And these are some examples about ways that we're doing that right now, is educating employers ongoing about options that are out there, working with employees to do that as well. And then these two emerging things, Central Vermont, the Go for a Community Rides on-demand pilot with Central Vermont Medical Center is just starting. And in Franklin County, there are 3 employers who are ready to come together. We need a transit provider. So I'll leave it there, but I want to hear any reactions, questions. I don't want to, I really want to hear if you have questions, or if there's something I can clarify. Transportation is one of those things I get pretty, I want to share what I can that makes the most sense for you in your decision making. So please tell me what you want to know.
Representative Wells has already got his hand up.
I'm amazed at how many people don't know the basic information, whether where to get their car changed, where they're having trouble with their payment, just basic things in life. I'm amazed as that many people don't understand that or can't function without your help. But I will say this, you're very patient and you're very kind.
Some days. Thank you. You've caught me on a good day, but at the end of the day, people will get what they need. They just might fall into not great things, right? Employees figure out their own solutions. We're not there to fix anything or fix anyone, but people come to us because they need that trusted relationship to figure out their plan. And that's the coaching part of it that I think needs to be embedded in our strategies, because not everyone has access to the same resources to learn the things, right? We have very diverse pockets in Northwest Vermont of folks who have never existed in a system that is, have never heard of a DMV, or maybe don't speak the language. And so those very deep, diverse pockets need some coaching around some of those, the literacy of it. But then there are other folks, I think, who, we get into situations, life happens, and deep scarcity. If I've experienced deep resource scarcity over time, I need to learn how to come out of that, right? I need opportunity to have what I need so I can be more planful and tap into some bandwidth that I need in order to plan ahead and to be mindful of those things. And it's true. I think we can take for granted that we in this room, we may have resources to back us up when things fall apart. And that's not the case for some of our neighbors and our friends and the people we love and take care of.
Representative Thomason?
Thank you. Thanks, Connie. I'm curious about to what extent people you're working with are utilizing fixed route public transit, and what the barriers are to utilizing that, as opposed to some of the more flexible or smaller scale types of public transit that you've spoken to in your presentation.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yes, we have employees who are using fixed route or using the bus. Mostly, when you think of GMT, the bus route is essential. Like having our bus route and not having that go away feels critical. However, as we get out into more rural spaces where we don't have that, that can become really difficult. And then I do realize employers who have 24/7 workforce, their shifts don't always align, right? Employers have varying times and start times. Industries have different needs in order to start. And so sometimes those workplaces aren't on bus routes. They may not have, there might not be a bus that moves at that time. And then we're working with folks who may not know where they're going to be housed. We're working with folks who don't have stability at the end of the day to say that this is my consistent trip. And I want to just shine a light on what scarcity looks like, and that I can show up at work, but I might not know who's going to get my child at childcare, or I might have to stay somewhere else tonight because that's how I'm managing my housing right now. I might need to get food before I go home because it's my only trip in and out that I can afford. And so just thinking about these other interconnected resources as it relates to our transportation, and then the mental model of if I don't have the things I need, I have to be able to get those things and operate from a place where I have more flexibility. And I think that keeps people off of some of the fixed routes.
Thank you.
I don't remember exactly who was next. So Representative White?
Thank you, Connie. It looks like you're doing some really important work connecting Vermonters with transportation solutions on a lot of different levels. So thank you for that. My question, can you just remind us of the funding for United Way? I know private donations are significant. Are you getting state funding, federal funding?
We do have state funding, and so I sit in United Way of Northwest Vermont, and we also have Working Bridges under Green Mountain United Way. So the program sits under both as one program. Our United Way of Northwest Vermont, has a combination of state dollars, fee for service, and philanthropy. So we have private funders, community giving, and I'm really glad to share with you that we are we're in a good position as far as federal funding, and that we have over the last, maybe even since 2019, sort of the last 5 years, our leadership has worked really hard to move us into sustainable funding sources. So as far as our organization, we continue to monitor the impacts to our nonprofit sector and what that means for our service providers and the human service landscape. Working Bridges continues to have a mix, but we are more fee for service. We have philanthropy that supports the back end, meaning our sort of the overhead and the support systems behind the work. Employers pay a fee for service for the direct service on site. So everybody has skin in the game, as we like to say. And so employers come together. It's really, you'll hear Jesse Bridges share that we're at the intersection of government, nonprofit, and community. And it's where we want to be in that convening when you think of the strategies that we have. And Working Bridges continues to sit with United Way because we directly fall under the community strategy of financial security. That's one of our priority areas. So when you think of how Working Bridges works, that's we have a sustainable model moving ahead. But thanks for the question. As I realize we're in a time of a lot of uncertainty.
Okay. Sorry, we're up against our time spot. Representative Burke, if you want to finish this up.
I just want to say this is very impressive work that you're doing. You referenced in one of the slides, some program, some state program that was no longer operating. What was that?
That was called Vermont Employment Transportation Initiative, VETI, and I'll stop sharing so I can see your faces better. But VETI, so resource coordinators to this day still talk about that. And they're like, why don't we have it anymore? We miss it. We need it, because it was held by Creative Workforce Solutions. I think it was state fund dollars, and I'm sure it had to be used in other ways. But to this day, we do, I think we often wish that we had that. And it helped with car
Did it
repair.
cut through the human services budget? Do you know where?
I think it was Agency of Transportation. I feel like Ross McDonald had a role in that, and I know one of my colleagues knew of it. So
I'd like to follow up with that.
yeah, it was, so Vermont Employment VETI, we call it VETI, or
Okay.
like service providers knew it as VETI, and it was cumbersome. It wasn't perfect, but it was a source that I think met this very need we're talking about is the thing. And the 185 Bridge Fund has sort of leveraged some community funds, like private donors and grants that want to support transportation or other essential resources like housing. So in some ways, that fund, which is within our network, sort of developed because VETI had to go away. But it would be really nice to see us leverage both the community giving and any state dollars that you think could be found to put that into some accessible bucket somewhere.
One more question. Do you know what the appropriation was?
Oh, say that again?
Do you know what the appropriation was? What you got from Betty?
No, because I think Creative Workforce Solutions held it, but for us, we went through them. They were the organization that had that funding, and so we, as partners, we were able to work with them. And that was what was neat about it, is that one entity can hold the funds, but then they can partner with workforce development partners so that we can identify those employees that need that support. It was a really nicely coordinated way. It was overwhelming, I think, probably for Creative Workforce Solutions to have that. And I don't know if they had capacity to hold it. So that was another probably another challenge to that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Certainly sounds like a Ross program.
Yeah,
Oh, Ross.
Great, and he's coming back. He'll be here again next week in committee. So, Connie, thank you very much.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate you sharing all of your information and your good work.
Likewise, I have to tell you how much I appreciate your good work, and I know it's hard work. And so thank you for showing up for Vermonters. I know it's not often you don't get a lot of thanks, and I see how hard you work and appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we're going to switch to our next presenter, who I know is waiting in the wings. And we have a sub, so.
And that's not Martin.
Hey, so Kelly Poor, can you hear us? Kelly Stoddard Poor, can
Yes,
you hear
I-
us?
yes, I
Thank
can
you.
hear
I'm
you.
sorry to run over.
That's okay.
But that happens, and we're now into AARP and transportation related, and one of our committee members had requested some additional voice from you, so thank you for coming, and please, it's all yours for the next 20 minutes.
Great. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for reaching out to AARP to have us in the committee. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I have a webinar right after this that I'm presenting on, so just needed to be able to do this remotely. So thank you, and I look forward to working with you all. I'm Kelly Stoddard Poor with AARP Vermont. I'm the Associate State Director. I lead our livable community work on behalf of the organization. So my work is primarily focused on housing, transportation, community support services, and public spaces as key components to be able to support older adults to be able to thrive and age in their community. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up my slides real quick. Right. And are you seeing my slides okay?
But not in, yeah, it needs to be in presentation mode. There you go.
Perfect.
All right, great. Excellent. Okay, super. All right. So that's just my opening slide. I'm going to go to the next one. I'm going to share a little bit of demographic information just to provide some context and why livability, walkable communities are so important to AARP. No surprise to all of you is that our country is aging. Vermont is one of the oldest states in the country. But what is really important about both of these graphs is that the aging of our demographic across the country and in Vermont, it's not a blip in time, right? So when you look at the right-hand column over there, in 2060, we are going to continue to age. We're living longer, we're living healthier lives, which is wonderful. But as we get older, our needs change. And so when we look around our community, we need to be thinking about how our communities are designed to help facilitate independence and the ability for older adults to be able to thrive in their community. So no surprise here where you see one of the biggest questions that come up for older adults, and this is a survey that AARP launched in 2022. We have survey data from 2019, and then we'll be putting this this study back out into the field in Vermont in the summer of 2025 this year. So we'll have 3 different survey snapshots asking the same question. And we saw a stark increase from 2019 to 2022 with the question about concerns around being able to get around in your community independently. And so one of the reasons, as I shared before, is when we look around in our communities, often we see that our streets have been designed solely for the use of automobiles. Many of our communities are not very walkable, they're not bike friendly, and many of them don't support public transit either. Some of them do. And but it's an important thing to think about when you're working so closely on the transportation bill and looking at how valuable state resources are being invested in Vermont, and just making the case that we need to continue to make strong investments in walkability, bikeability, and public transit so that people can be able to move around and be able to get to places that they need to go. Census data shows that 8.3% of households do not own or have access to a motor vehicle. And it's important for us to also recognize that as we are getting older, it is expected that all of us sitting around this room and in Zoom will be outliving our driving years. It's estimated as women will be outliving our driving years by 10, and for men around 7 years. So we need to think about how we're able to continue to remain independent and thrive in our communities if we're no longer able to drive, and finding other ways for people to get about. So a couple of more stats to share with you. And I just want, this is from Smart Growth America. They do an annual report called Dangerous by Design. This is data from 2010 to 2022. And you see this trend that's happening across the country is that there are more deaths happening for people who are walking since 2010. So we are not going in the positive, we're going in the negative in regards to this risk. And then here is another slide that just shows the increased risk as we get older to be able to survive an injury or a crash. So somebody who is younger and is hit by a vehicle has a greater chance of surviving that injury than somebody who is older. And so safety is a huge concern. We all know that safety is a big concern for all of us when we want to go out walking, and speed, it tends to be a real concern for people who want to go out and walk, and our streets do not feel safe because of cars moving too fastly, and there's not the elements there to be able, and the infrastructure to be able to facilitate walking and biking.
Kelly, we have a question for you, Representative McCourt.
So those percentages is that Vermont specific or is that nationwide?
This one's national. I do have a couple slides with some Vermont specific data.
Okay.
Yep. This was just more to illustrate sort of like this global trend that's happening in the country, and that, Vermont's not an outlier. And we need to think about how we're making those types of investments in walkability to be able to make sure that people are safe.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So this is, here's a image of the United States. And so we have 8 states who have improved for long-term improvements around fatalities when it comes to walking. And Vermont is not highlighted here. Most of New England is, but we've got Vermont and Connecticut as outliers there, where those 8 states have seen improvements in reducing fatalities when walking. So this is data also from Smart Growth America, Dangerous by Design. And you can see here pedestrian deaths from 2008 to 2022. So for 2013 to 2017, we had 27 pedestrian fatalities. And then in 2018 to 2022, we had 31. And so that's really concerning. And so we want to think about how we're continuing to make investments, particularly for towns who, and I'll get into this a little bit more later in the presentation, but need the resources to be able to upgrade outdated infrastructure. So public transit is also an important component here when we're thinking about overall mobility. So these 4 prominent themes came out of VTransid's public transit public policy plan from 2020. 2020. Yes, I have the source down there at the bottom there. And so lack of transit access in rural areas. I don't think that this is also a surprise to anyone on this committee, but thinking about ways that you can really invest in on-demand services for more rural routes, and continuing those investments. Also, the amenities that go along with ridership is really important. I've had the pleasure of working with Ross McDonald over the last few years, working on some pilot projects to be able to bring about more bus shelters and benches and things like that, because it's such an important component to being able to support strong bus ridership. The second one, lack of resources to meet the needs of vulnerable populations. as we age, we're going to have more people who are going to need public transit to be able to get not just to medical appointments, but social activities as well, making sure that they're able to get outside of the house on a regular basis. Social connections are really important. Social isolation is a real concern for individuals who are not able to get out and make those connections with others. The impact that social isolation, prolonged social isolation has on our health can be very detrimental. There are studies that show that prolonged social isolation is equivalent to smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. We all know what that does to our health. And so it means that it really can lead to premature death. So we want to make sure that we're investing in connections that can keep Vermonters connected to their community, to their family, to their neighbors. And then the third theme that arose was lack of transportation for access to jobs. And then the last one in areas that have bus routes, improved services and connections. So we don't want to see a reduction in service, because then the service itself becomes unreliable for people who need to use transit. So a few opportunities. I know that you've heard from other stakeholders and from VTrans. I think there's a lot of opportunity with the updated multimodal guidance, which will further help support implementation of complete streets in Vermont. VTrans is managing that. ARP serves also on the advisory committee for there and have been greatly involved in that process. I'm really looking forward to the completion of the multimodal guidance. ARP, we are working with VTrans we hired Smart Growth America to do an analysis of state highway reclassification. So we're working on finalizing that analysis that we would be happy to bring back to this committee either this session or next session to talk about some action steps after that. And then one of, the opportunities and challenges is that we have, really strong local government. I think a lot of towns struggle with capacity, managing grants, the local match requirements that are needed to secure funding, and then the need to be able to really find funding so that they can do the infrastructure upgrades in their community that will greatly enhance livability. So some of our priorities focused on the policy piece, reducing Vermont's general minimum posted speed limit to 20 miles per hour, aligning this law that there is no minimum speed limit for the tier 1 and the tier 1A and B areas. And then I know that this is a tough fiscal climate and your job is really difficult right now, but just looking at maintaining investments for Bike and Ped grant program administered by VTrans, and then the Downtown Transportation Fund, as you know, the governor level funded the DTF at $500,000. If that continues, then the villages would not be able to access the Downtown Transportation Fund. So considering expanding that so that villages also have access to the Downtown Transportation Fund is really important. I think really to think about the ability for small communities to be able to access funding like that is important. And then I'm not sure if you've heard much about the Better Places program, which is in the Department of Housing and Community Development. And Better Places program, the sunset language was removed last legislative session. It would be really important to see some funding there. This supports community projects that are focused on really enhancing public spaces. And it is just one of the most terrific programs that can really be a spark to some more long-term change in the community. And then lastly, funding for Green Mountain Transit to avoid additional reductions in service. This is, I know, a challenging year, and having the one-time funds from the governor's budget of $500,000, looking to close that gap with another $500,000 would greatly ensure that service isn't lost and that people are continuing to be able to get to where they need to go. And then I just want to share very quickly just some programs that ARP has that hopefully you can take advantage of in your community. So our Community Challenge Grant Program is out there right now. The deadline for applying for grants is March 5th. We fund small projects from $2,500 up to $25,000. So if you would like more information to get out to your community, please just let me know. I'd be happy to get that to you. And then our Walking College Fellowship Program, we have a number of walking advocates out in Vermont that are always happy to help lead walk audits in your community, or you could reach out to me. I lead a number of walk audits every year as well. If you're looking at trying to assess some improvements that you could make in your community to enhance walkability, I'm always here as a resource for that as well.
That's interesting. Kelly, I hope we're getting close to the, I'm sorry to say I've let the time frame get off a little bit.
That's
I
all
really
right.
appreciate the coming in and presenting, and the last couple of spots. I'm sure that especially for all of our newer members, they'd love to see that information. They can share as they're headed to town meeting.
Yep.
Representative Pouch, they'll get the last question here.
It's a question or a comment, I guess. I appreciate you highlighting, the fact that everybody in this committee room, on average, will be 7 to 10 years unable to drive their vehicles. But the lack of getting to a doctor's office or to be able to socialize, is a huge impact on the quality of life. And I will like to say, AARP helped Heinsberg put in a flashing beacon crosswalk across from a new elderly housing development, affordable development, right in the middle of 116. And without that, you'd have to walk quite a ways in a dangerous way to get on the other side of the street. So you guys are doing fantastic work, and everybody in Vermont is aging as we speak. Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Phil.
Yeah, appreciate it.
And on that note, have a great weekend. Kelly, I just wanted to give you guys a shout out for kind of raising the profile of the Humble bus shelter. As I've been driving around in the snow with our snowy conditions, I've noticed that, where we have a bus shelter, the sidewalk is plowed, but not just that, but there is created a sort of snow ramp from the sidewalk to allow somebody to get onto a bus. But we don't do that where there's just a stick, in the ground. So I think those are some cost-effective ways, and I would love to explore. I'm inspired to explore with AOT whether this is something community partnerships could. One of our representatives, new representatives, is a builder, my district mate. And in his business in Shelburne Village actually built a little bus shelter, but because it was, taking a bit long to get public funding for this. So they were able to make that happen. And that would be something maybe we could replicate a little more easily, a touch of transit friendliness, in our villages and towns in these challenging fiscal times.
Absolutely. And I would welcome the opportunity to talk more offline with you and with Ross McDonald, because there's so many opportunities, I think, with, some private funding, with some nonprofit funding, that we can be able to put together something that can get more bus shelters, more seating out there in small communities. We're working with Advanced Transit to get a couple of new bus shelters up in White River Junction. And I just welcome the opportunity to be able to do this across other Vermont communities. There's a real need for that.
Great, I'll be in touch.
Thank you very much. Thank you for
Thank you.
coming in. Thank you for joining us. Good luck with your webinar that you have to go do. And, have a nice weekend. And we're going to move on to the next topic thank you, Kelly. We're going to move on to the next piece. I believe they're waiting in the wings as well. Part of our accountability piece in reference to the T-bill of previous expectations that the committee had put into the bill. Oops, I guess I'm not sure where we're at. Can you see us all? There you go. We're going to hand it off, and our staff attorney from the Public Utility Commission is now up and running, and a new presenter to the committee, as far as I know. Welcome, and
Thank you.
hand it off to you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Micah Howe. I'm from the Vermont Public Utility Commission, here to discuss the Commission's 2025 EV report, and in particular, the section addressing utility service upgrade practices that was required by Act 148 last year. Before I do, I've been asked to note something that the commission is also going to be in touch about, related to some technical changes to some sections that refer to the Public Service Board. I don't know if this has been mentioned. My understanding was that this would that Greg Faber at the commission has been in touch with Damian Leonard about some possible changes, and he is going to send those changes over to the committee either today or right after this meeting. I just wanted to give everyone a heads up, and I was told this would not come as a surprise, but just in case it does, that's where that's coming from. I will jump back to the EV report. So in this section, in my understanding, and you can redirect me if however you like, but my understanding is that we are talking just about the utility upgrade practices today. So that's what I will give my brief overview on, and then answer any questions about any parts of the report that you may have. So last year we were asked to provide a reporting of utility upgrade practices, costs, and frequencies of upgrades related to EV service equipment installation. So basically the installation of EV chargers and the utility side upgrades that are required as part of that. We discussed it briefly. I have talked before the committee last year, at which point we were hashing out what this reporting topic would look like. So based on the information we received from the utilities, most utilities follow a cost causation approach. And a cost causation approach is where the customer requesting the service upgrade would pay for the cost of that service upgrade. Most of the utilities reference their internal policies, terms and conditions, and also the Vermont Utilities Service Requirements Manual as the source for their applying the cost causation approach. And this is similar to what utilities apply in line extensions and other similar utility build outs related to new service. For the most part, this was entirely a cost causation approach with sometimes there's a payback as other customers take advantage of the newly available service. That was not the standard practice, although some utilities did explain that they would obtain some contribution from a second mover on the upgraded service if that came along fairly quickly. There were also a number of utilities that actually paid for the service upgrades, and these included Burlington Electric, which paid for the cost of the transformer in Burlington Electric service territory. Customers still pay for labor and line upgrade costs. Washington Electric also pays for transformer upgrades. And then Vermont Electric and Green Mountain Power have provisions written into their line extension tariffs under which they pay for service upgrades provided that the benefit associated with the upgrade exceeds the cost. And both VEC and GMP reported that they have always found that the benefit exceeds the cost and always pay for those upgrades at this point. And that began, I believe, in 2020 with Vermont Electric, and then more recently in 2023 Green Mountain Power. And then also in the utility pays category are some of the Vermont Public Power Supply Authority utilities. So Northfield, Orleans, and Enosburg Falls also pay for transformer upgrades. The report also addressed upgrade frequencies, which we more or less expected would vary, and they did in fact vary across the state, ranging from no service upgrade requests to as many as 50 a year with some of the larger utilities. Costs for residential, which is primarily the information that we received, were actually fairly clustered in the $1,500 to $4,000 range when a transformer upgrade was required. And then line upgrade costs were in the mid 100s. So roughly $300 to $500, I think, is what we got back on those numbers. So hopefully that answers or provides useful information. Some of it was a surprise to me. I expected more cost causation. So learning that some utilities are actually paying for the service upgrades was new information to me. So with that, I don't have anything else to share, and I'd love to answer some questions.
Representative Powell? Yeah, thanks for this. And I was, I think somebody in the last session that was concerned as the state policies, encouraging EVs, encouraging thermal heat through heat pumps and whatnot, more efficiency, that there would be some folks who have a house and maybe they've got to upgrade their electric box. Okay, that's on them, no question about it. But then, the power coming from the street is maybe, not at 100 amps or 200 amps. And now, they say, oh, I need to upgrade that too. And then to find out, hey, I got to buy a new transformer. So what you're saying is that could still happen, but in most cases that doesn't happen. And so I'll let you answer that. That's my question. Is that a fair, can I read that from what you said? And then, the assumption too is if you're in a very remote area and you've had to pay, which I've done in a previous house, had to pay to put in a couple poles to get to where it's going, then of course that would be on me, I would assume. But that's sort of, so fill us in on what you said and what my sort of thought process is.
Sure. I think you understand it correctly. The only thing I'm not confident in is that the most people would not incur that cost. I think it's a lot, but I'm not sure exactly what the percentage is in terms. I haven't aligned the frequency of service upgrade requests based on the information we got with the policy of that particular utility in the service territory. Certainly BC, Green Mountain Power, and Burlington Electric covers most of the customers. So it probably is a fair statement. And they also get the most service upgrade requests. So in those service territories, customers are not going to be paying for the transformer upgrade. It's when you get into some of the smaller utilities, so Hyde Park, Stowe, and many of the municipal utilities that are not covering those costs, where those customers would incur the upgrade costs. But those utilities, at least the municipal utilities, also reported the lowest number of service upgrade requests. So there is sort of a natural alignment between utilities covering those costs and the highest number of requests. But I think there are still, there are certainly still cases out there where customers are having to pay for those service upgrade requests if they request them. And you are correct that the line extension example you gave is the principle that the utilities that are charging customers for service upgrades are applying. So basically the cost to run new lines out to a new residence, for example, or a residence that didn't previously have power, would be incurred by that customer, and they apply that same principle to the transformer upgrade. And just to clarify, the transformer upgrade is not the entire cost of the transformer. It is the differential between what they have and what they put in. So that the larger transformer costs more. That differential is what the customer pays. That's what generates the $1,500 to $4,000 cost range. But that old transformer is not scrap. It gets reused somewhere or resold somewhere. It's not a total loss to the utility.
Okay, I appreciate that clarification and, you know, just trying to understand. One follow-up question is, you know, we're sort of talking about an individual sitting there saying, hey, I need an EV charger. The electrician says, you know, you don't have it. And you're not getting it from the street right now. What about a neighborhood who, you know, one person or two aren't going to require the line upgrade to that neighborhood, but, you know, together they might. Is there any sort of look, you know, by the power companies, the utilities that sort of say, well, we need to, it seems like the utilities should have to provide a certain amount to each household, sort of automatically in my mind. But, you know, I'll let you speak to my question.
Yeah, and there are base levels of service. You know, certainly 100 amps, I think, is what is in the what's the name of the electric service requirements manual, which is basically an agreement between the utilities, certain utilities that have signed on. It's almost all, but not all of the utilities in Vermont. I'll start with your line extension example, which is easier to explain, and then I'll migrate that to the service upgrade example. With a line extension, the way those line extension policies work under a cost causation principle is the requesting user has to pay for it. And then if additional users come on, and typically there's a 7-year window or something for accounting purposes, if additional customers come onto that line, there's a kickback, a payback to the original paying customer. So they get the benefit of additional people coming on. And certainly if they all come on together, it would reduce everyone's costs. That's called contribution in aid of construction. And in that situation, the utility pays a share, but the cost causers also pay a share. With a service upgrade, it's usually a single cause. So someone comes in. And we did at the workshop that we held discuss whether or not there was this subsequent payback period. And most utilities said no. So this was a single instance, a single cost as a result of a service upgrade. And that requester would be responsible for all those costs. Now, several of the munis, 2 or 3 of the muni utilities did say, you know, within a certain period, they would do a cost sharing with someone else who came on and took advantage of that service upgrade. So there was, but it was just 2 or 3. It was by far the minority of utilities who applied cost causation that would have a cost sharing, a subsequent cost sharing. Now, for utilities that are paying for the transformer, obviously none of this matters because the customer's not actually incurring costs. So we are, in terms of the cost sharing, subsequent cost sharing, we are talking about just the cost causation utilities.
Thank you.
Representative Fugia was first, and then over to Lally, and then to Lyle.
Thank you, Mike. Excuse me. So what we're talking about is residential.
Primarily residential. We did get one number, let me pull it up real quick. On commercial, they gave us, one utility had primarily commercial build outs. They had not actually had any residential. Swanton Electric has only had requests for commercial service upgrades. And those costs are substantially higher. They reported 8,000 to 25,000. But also in the commercial context, that service upgrade could be anything. It's hard to say. I mean, that could be for multiple chargers, public chargers on their facility. So I think that range, while it will certainly be higher, it could be a very different project than a residential home upgrade.
Okay, follow up on that then. So basically what we're talking about, the utilities so are up to level 2. We're not talking about supporting residential number 3 chargers.
Correct. No.
Okay. All right. What happened? Do you have any information about what would happen if they asked for a number 3?
I don't know. No one mentioned that even as a possibility. I'm not sure that I've never seen a residential level 3 or heard of it.
Yep. Okay. Thank you very much. A farm might have a welder or a small business in the backyard. We have a repair shop that would have 3-phase power. So that event could happen. But thank you very much for your information.
Sure.
Representative Well?
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering, given the pressing need and so much policy prioritizing this transition, I was wondering how accessible or transparent this information is to a customer. And if there was any sort of standard approach that is being used, if this is something that's, you got a sense of sort of like on the radar screen of some of these utilities, just to increase the ease of this. And a second question I had, which I hope will be related, is opportunities that might exist in places that have 3-phase power already. Are those corridors sort of, is that easier? If someone lives near with access to one of these locations, does that make things quite a bit easier? And if so, are we taking advantage of that at all with our, just the serendipity of maybe living near one of these places and opportunities that might be available to somebody to upgrade panels and add charging equipment, that sort of thing. So sorry, a lot of questions there, but a very interesting topic.
Let me start with the first, and then I might need you to remind me of the second when I finish that. But I'll take a shot at both. Let me start with the first. As far as transparency, with a lot of these utilities, they call up and ask for a service upgrade, and they're told that this is how it works. I don't know that it's really publicized or advertised, but it's not a known or unknown thing. So that a customer calls and says, I need additional a higher level of service to support heat pumps and level 2 charger. Can you tell me how I go about doing that? And they get the answer. A lot of the utilities all have procedures and internal policies, but it's maybe everyone in the room is different, but I've certainly never read mine. So I think it's that sort of situation where it's the information is there if you call and ask or if you look for it, but it's not really a promoted thing. I don't believe any of the utilities that are covering costs are promoting it either. On the flip side of that, I wasn't even aware of the tariff exceptions in Green Mountain Power and DEC's line extension tariff until they raised it in the workshop. In terms of the utilities' awareness or looking into this, I'm certain after this topic was included in our EV investigation this year, and I made clear that there's probably a reason why this question's being asked, and all the utilities understood that this is probably something that they will need to look into or to be prepared for. So does that answer the first part of your question?
It does. Thank you. Very comprehensively. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. And then the second part of your question, I don't know that anything is certainly the closer you are to a stronger portion of the grid, the better off you are with the service upgrade, and that will largely be dictated by the infrastructure. So certainly wires, but also your transformers. And if you live way out on the end of a spur, then certainly it's going to be more challenging for the upgrade and could require more substantial cost. The 3-phase versus 2-phase power, if you're close to 3-phase power, you're on a strong section of the grid. So it really just 3-phase versus 2-phase, I don't think makes a significant difference to your cost, but it certainly has an influence. It certainly means that you are closer to a very strong section of the grid. But there are, 2-phase is plenty for most applications. It really has to do with how far out on the line you are.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Representative White?
Yeah, so my question is really on the heels of Representative Lally's question regarding sharing this information with the public. And it sounds like you've done a lot of research. You have shared with us different utilities practices, when they will cover the cost, when they won't, the approximate amount, when they won't. Do you have a one-page summary of your findings? To me, as a member of the public, like, I think about Efficiency Vermont is kind of the place where we are sending people to find out about incentives to buy EVs, heat pumps, et cetera. And if just a general summary of this information could be shared there. So when a member of the public is contemplating, one of these upgrades, that they would just have more of a sense of all the costs that they would be looking at. I have an EV, I have a level 2 charger that Green Mountain Power supplied. I had to pay to get it installed with my electrician. I never would have thought about the possibility of perhaps needing to upgrade our transformer. Luckily, it wasn't a cost, and it sounds like GMP would have covered it anyway. But I just think this is critical information to share with the public so that they have a fuller understanding of what their overall costs would be.
We do not have a one-page summary. That section, it was a discrete section in the report, is 2.5 pages, and it certainly could be consolidated. It's more information than the general public would be looking for. I'm not sure who exactly we would provide that to. But you mentioned Efficiency Vermont. I'm not sure where the best resource to post that on would be, but it's certainly something we could put together. We have, it was a workshop setting, followed up by written comments, which we distilled down into about 2.5 pages. And I think for a public facing document, it could be certainly distilled down to 1 page.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if other people have opinions, but I feel like Efficiency Vermont homepage might be the best place for that.
Representative Pouch?
Yeah, thank you. This is great information you're providing. Again, our state goals are looking at, in this case, residential homes and I guess apartments and whatnot, to look toward electrifying for efficiency, for cost, stabilization, for those sort of things. You mentioned that a number of utilities sort of have a minimum of 100 amps, but not all of them. I guess if the legislature wanted to say, hey, that's a minimum, I'm sure utilities have minimum things they have to meet, and others go far and beyond that, Green Mountain Power. But as a minimum, if the legislature thought that, you know, hey, 100 amp minimum is what's appropriate for a utility, we could, you know, move forward legislation that sort of says that's the expectation for all of our public utilities. Is that possible?
I don't know that I could set a minimum level. I think that would require a broader discussion with the utilities that we have not had in terms of, you know, certainly we do forecasting, and the utilities all do a forecast every 3 years on expected load growth. So what that number would be, I couldn't say at this point.
Okay, but if we came up with a standard, working with the utilities, that sort of, maybe it's 200 amps, you know, and a household would need to upgrade whatever they need to, but it's up to the utility, if, you know, you've got the line right out the street, to be able to provide that. That would take that legislative action.
My hesitation is that there's such a variety in the service territories of these utilities that I'm not sure a one size fits all approach definitely works. And before I don't want to get too far out on that limb because I don't know enough to go out that far, basically.
All right, well, yeah, thanks. I appreciate it.
Okay, anybody else? Well, a lot of great questions. Very much appreciate you coming in on Friday for us and presenting. Anybody else have anything else?
Yeah, one last question. Was there any indication at all of whether this is a real problem? Because I don't, you know, I've heard anecdotally of people, you know, unable to upgrade or saying that this is a burden, that there's no way they can afford to do it because, oh, they got to upgrade transformers and stuff. Is there any data that actually shows that it's a concern now with meeting state goals?
So I can't answer that question, but I can tell you that during the workshop, our conversation was with the distribution utilities. And I know that Hyde Park in particular mentioned that they've had several inquiries in terms of service upgrades, none of which were taken. They are a cost causation side, so I don't know if that tells you that there is a problem, but it's a data point where someone has inquired as to upgrading their service and then decided not to go ahead with it because of some reason, one of which may have been cost. So they have inquiries, but no, they've never actually done a service upgrade, they said, related to EVs.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right. Thank you very much. I have a couple of committee announcements before we wrap up. We got 1 minute left. Mika, thank you very much. We can stay live for another 1 minute or so. Next week, I finish the appropriations letter. There's some work that I've already started on your MBUF rejection or direction, and we have public transit next week. Projections related to the federal highway money, agency money, revenues pieces. There's multiple parts to that. Town highway money and aid that we did talk about earlier today. That's on the agenda for next week as well. And RPCs and towns, and then we will make some adjustments to respond to some of the stuff that we heard earlier today. Have a very nice weekend.